Welcome to another episode at Creative Mind China. Today with Madeleine Martinek. She holds a PhD in law, in Chinese law, and please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I studied law at the University of Heidelberg, and I did my first state exam there. And already at that time, I had a great interest in Chinese law. I attended some classes in Chinese law, and I also participated in a summer law school in Hangzhou in China. After these studies at the University of Heidelberg, I went to University of Göttingen, where I was offered to do a PhD thesis, and I chose Chinese law, Chinese constitutional law, Chinese administrative law, special economic zones in China. That was my topic. And I also combined it with a LLM program, namely Chinese law and comparative law. It's quite a unique LLM program organized by the University of Göttingen in cooperation with the University of Nanjing. And during this LLM program, I stayed 1 year in Nanjing, and I got a deep insight into Chinese law there. I also used this time to do some further research for the PhD thesis. Yeah, the first trip to China triggered my interest in Chinese law and Chinese culture and Chinese history. I went there 2005 with my family, and then in 2007 I spent another month in Beijing to just learn a little bit the language and to just dive into the Chinese culture. And already at that time, I noticed this incredible dynamic that I also feel and see today here. The incredible dynamics in Chinese economy and also in Chinese law. That's what it makes so exciting. Everything changes incredibly fast, and you have to adapt to the different situations, and also this innovation thrive. That's what's so fascinating for me about China. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree to that. I think as a German, we also already live in a bubble. Maybe we can definitely already learn from Chinese people regarding, especially regarding the fast changing culture and the fast changing economy in China.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To your first point, professional experience, I worked as a legal consultant, and in this regard, I consulted German small, medium enterprises coming to China and wanting to enter the Chinese market. And me and my team, we consulted them on the various investment forms, for example, wholly foreign-owned enterprise, joint venture, and we also drafted the respective contracts, for example, articles of association or joint venture contract, depending on which investment form they chose or was the most suitable. So yeah, that is a very important reason for for German companies to really enter the Chinese market. They want to expand their business by establishing a new company or by forming a joint venture, or maybe also only by founding a representative office that allows them to operate in a rather smaller scope. Yeah, so that was one big field of work we did. Then I also helped them analyze, draft, and also look at the cross-border sales contracts, because there are many German companies having sales cooperation with Chinese companies, and we help them pay attention to certain aspects. For example, whether they should go to court or whether they should actually have an arbitration clause. So that was a very diverse field of work, I would say. What I would recommend young students having an interest in China or yeah, wanting to work here, I would say the most important thing is to travel to China, to really see the country, to travel through China, to see the different provinces first, to talk to people, and to really see and experience what you've read about China, the history, the culture. Because I think reading is the one thing, and then experiencing is the other. And I think only in China you know, it's such a complex country with so many different cultures, many minorities as well, and the southern part of China is different from the north. So that's, I think, would be my first advice, to just see the country and experience it. And then, of course, starting to learn the language, because I think when you dive into the Chinese language, into this very metaphorical language, then you also, you know, get a picture and get the spirit of what's what the Chinese mentality and the Chinese culture is about. Yeah.
Do you think, maybe regarding the language, do you think it is very important for a young professional in China to speak Chinese, or is it only like a nice to have skill? Is it really important for you as a legal representative?
Mm, mhm. Yeah, well, in my work, it wasn't that essential to really have negotiation skills in Chinese, because I'm myself not able to really negotiate a contract, but I'm able I have some knowledge of the legal Chinese, also because of my PhD thesis, and I'm of the opinion, if you want to deal with China, if you want to deal with Chinese law, then you should have some basic knowledge of Chinese. I would say HSK4 maybe in my case was actually sufficient, I would say. So yeah, that is already, I think, a good start, and then you can actually build upon that. But yeah, and also I think in everyday's life, it of course helps you to actually communicate, to make yourself understandable, because sometimes it's still challenging not to speak Chinese and actually be able to survive. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Talking about that, talking a bit about everyday life. Can you can you say or tell something about like a cultural exchange, a cultural encounter in China that was really special, maybe a bit funny, maybe interesting, exciting, that you would never have experienced in Germany?
Yeah, there are some moments, and it's actually, yeah, moments that you really wouldn't ever experience in Germany. And I think on the one side, you have these very heartwarming moments and you feel cordially welcome, and these are touching moments. But on the other side, you also have very, frustrating moments, and that you just leave yourself a little bit speechless. I remember two experiences actually. The one was I just went to the Carrefour to buy a heating, because here in Beijing we have heating, but they only turn it on, I think, at the end of November. So, and before that it already gets cold. So I wanted to buy this heating by my credit card, and yeah, I mean, at that time I hadn't installed WeChat Pay yet. So yeah, I bought it. I wanted to buy it with my credit card. And this lady at the cashier, she just yeah, stared at this credit card. She took some photos. She took a photo from the of the front side, of the back side, and she just made some phone calls. And I was wondering what was the problem, and also the fact that she actually took these photos, you know, of my very sensitive data, so that could easily lead to an abuse or so of the credit card. So that was actually, yeah, I was very speechless and couldn't believe it. Yeah, it appeared to me that maybe the credit card was already outdated, and only WeChat Pay exists. So that was a bit strange for me. And the other encounter was even weirder, I think, because it was just when I was on my way to work, and I think I was just messaging or so, and I didn't quite pay attention on the pavement, and then all of a sudden I really bumped into a turtle. A turtle was kind of hanging down from a wagon, and yeah, so all of a sudden I had this turtle in front of my face,
Okay.
and there was this elderly Chinese man pushing the wagon away, and I was so shocked, because I just
Okay.
didn't expect a turtle hanging down.
Okay.
So yeah, weird experiences.
Yeah, of course, of course. Yeah, that would never happen. Especially the turtle thing would never happen in Germany. Maybe the credit card would happen in Germany, but like
Yeah.
in another way, because they would not accept credit card, only cash, right? In China, it's totally different. They just skipped the credit card payment and now only have online or mobile payment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit more about
Yeah.
your expertise. That's really interesting about your expertise in law and Chinese legislations. So maybe you can give for all the young listeners that do not know that much about Chinese law a short introduction. What are the most crucial differences between Chinese and, for example, German law?
Yeah, I think the most crucial difference is that in China, the Communist Party stands above the law.
Mhm.
So the law is mainly used as a tool to to safeguard and to also implement political interests. So law is actually used as an instrument. And we always call that rule by law, in contrast to the Western or the German concept of rule of law, which means that the rule of the law is actually rules everything. The law stands above everything and is independent from any politics. And law is not used as an instrument by instrument or so, but by its validity already, it obtains dignity. That is our notion, ideal notion of law. And we also have this division, judicative, executive, legislative, and in Chinese law it's a bit more blurred, I would say. And I think one other aspect is, and that I also analyzed in my PhD thesis, China has a very pragmatic approach towards law. So, I think this is actually, I think, it's actually a good thing, because the Chinese law adapts very quickly to the changing socioeconomic situations, and law is used to experiment and to so that's actually also quite a good thing, I would say. But of course, it also, in speaking from a German law perspective, that endangers legal certainty. And so there are many advantages and many disadvantages, but one must say that Chinese law adopted many concepts from the German law. And I think that's why it is very interesting to do actually this legal comparison between Chinese law and German law.
Mhm. Yeah, you already also mentioned a bit of your PhD thesis that you wrote a bit about like the pragmatic approach of Chinese law, and you also wrote about what I want to mention first, the special economic zones. They were implemented already some time ago, the first time I think by Deng Xiaoping, and maybe you can give a bit more background on like the legislation background on special economic zones.
First of all, when you hear special economic zones, there is and from the international context, by special economic zones, we understand usually a designated area where special incentives are implemented in order to attract foreign investors.
Mhm.
And the term special economic zone in the international context is used for very different concepts of zones. For example, export processing zones that actually focus on fostering the export, or bonded zones for customs privileges.
Mhm.
but so all they have in common is actually that there are certain incentives or privileges that are enjoyed by foreign investors. And when we talk about the Chinese concept of special economic zone, that is usually referred to, as you said, to the zones implemented by Deng Xiaoping at the end of the 1970s or beginning of the 1980s. In the course of the reform and opening up policies. And there were 5 zones implemented. Shenzhen Special Economic Zones, it's the most successful zone that I also concentrated on in my thesis. Then also Zhuhai and Shantou, and all in Guangdong province. Then we have Xiamen in Fujian province, and then the whole island of Hainan is also designated as a special economic zone. And they were implemented in order to experiment with more liberal policies and to have tax holidays, but also privileges in land allocation in order to attract foreign investors. Because we have to imagine that at the end of the 1970s, China was economically down and isolated and did not have so many connections actually to the outside world. So one wanted to actually have a boost in economy and also in law, and because practically no legal system existed. Actually China had to start from scratch. And I think the special economic zones were really a fabulous tool to boost economy and also the legal system.
Yeah, especially about Shenzhen. This is really interesting that before it was there was implemented a special economic zone in that area. There was like nothing there, right? Shenzhen was like a fishing village. It has no history. Many great cities like Beijing or Xi'an in China, they have a great history, right? The Chinese always talk about like their 5,000 years of empires and dynasties, but Shenzhen was like nothing, and now it's a really, really modern city with everything about technology you never heard about. And that's really something which is fascinating, I think, about China and about these special economic zones.
Yeah, Shenzhen is really, as you said, it was a fisherman village, and although that is sometimes also debatable, some said there were traces actually already of some modern beginnings, but it's a very young city indeed, and it has developed a really a jump of modernization. And it's still actually it's still actually used as an example for legislative development, because many laws were developed actually in the special economic zone that were then spread to the whole nation. So that's quite interesting.
Do you know about any examples of these laws from special economic zones spread to the nation?
Yeah, for example, in the company law, for example, there because when foreign investors came to Shenzhen, first there were only simple forms of companies, for example, also like joint ventures. But then in Shenzhen, many other legal forms of companies were established, and the legal foundation was created. For example, for the concept of a wholly foreign-owned enterprise, or the joint venture. So the partnership, I mean. And I mean, at that time, wholly foreign-owned enterprise was unthinkable, actually, because one actually wanted to avoid a too strong influence by foreign investors. So that is an example, but also concerning the notion of contracts. I mean, before we had this rigid planned economy, and contractual rights and contractual obligations merely existed. Actually, didn't exist. And so everything was actually planned by the state. And so in Shenzhen, actually the labor contract, the notion of a contract, but also the notion of a lawyer as someone who actually really defends rights and who is not just the servant of the state. So all these concepts were created in Shenzhen special economic zones. And there are many other examples.
If you look at, so if you look at these changes that were starting by have been started by Deng Xiaoping in the 1970s and later in the 80s, do you think this trend of like opening up China still continues?
I would say yes. Concerning the company law, we can also see that now at the newly implemented foreign investment law, that the foreign investment law was enacted last year in January. And there we can also see how actually the Chinese economy is further opening up, because the foreign investment law aims at having the foreign companies be equal with the domestic companies. So equality is being achieved between the foreign and the domestic companies. Then also the protection of trade secrets is emphasized in this law. And then also an important aspect is the concept of a negative list. And the negative list, this is a concept that was actually, and there we see again the significance of these zones. It was experimented actually in the Shanghai Free Trade Zone. Negative list means before we had the foreign investment guidance catalog. So we had these investments restricted, allowed, and forbidden. And so the notion was if something is not explicitly allowed, it is forbidden. And now it's actually a totally different concept. Now it's actually, if something is not explicitly forbidden, it is allowed. So the negative list actually lists the sectors that are restricted or forbidden. And the negative list over the years got more and more reduced. So actually, that is actually also a kind of progress and a sign of further opening up for foreign investments.
Great. Yeah. So now one last question it's at the end because it's mostly for the students that are really interested, or like for the young listeners that are really interested in like researching regarding China, or are really interested in Chinese laws. And so how do you, as a legal consultant and as a lawyer in China, how do you do research in Chinese laws? And what are your tips for maybe students or also young professionals that want to go in this area?
I think there are actually many good resources one can rely on and one can use. For example, the Berlin National Library has this crossasia.org. It's this web page where you can really find great literature, many articles on Chinese law, but also for not only for lawyers, but also it actually concerns also other subjects. So crossasia.org is a good database for actually having access to legal or other articles. And I think also the American universities from the US, I think they have also many good sources and great scholars. I noticed that during my PhD thesis, and I'm still in touch with many of them, because in the US, I think unlike in Germany, unfortunately, there are many chairs of Chinese law in the US, and they have really built up a great Chinese legal education. I think in Germany, we are still like lagging behind a little bit, although there's also great exchange when we think of the German Chinese Lawyers Association, or also then the Göttingen Institute for the Sino-German Institute for Legal Studies. That is also a great example. But I think we need more young people to actually really foster the dialogue and to strengthen the education of China in general. Because I think so we still know too little, and we still maybe underestimate China, or we have a totally wrong picture of China. And this is that's a pity, actually, because China is on the rise, and I think we should deal with it and occupy ourselves with it by reading and by also traveling to this country.
Yeah, definitely. I think definitely there's like a gap or like a hole in education about China, especially in Germany and Europe. I think actually in the United States, there's better education regarding China at universities. And also, like, if you would go to a bookshop, you would probably find way more books about China in an US store than in a German store, where you really can't find any books. Although China is such an important partner and trading partner for Germany, right? So also regarding the bookshops,
Yes.
can you recommend a book?
Well, I recently, I must say, I focused more on the legal literature, but in order to get an insight maybe on the political or legal system, which is actually also quite important, also especially when you want to when you study also economics or so, and when you want to do business with China, I think one good book that gives a great overview is. I think it's called The Political System of the PRC in a Nutshell by Daniel Cho. And then one book is called, but it's in German, it's Einführung in das Recht Chinas by Yuan Shibu. She is a professor at the University of Freiburg. And then there's also a good book that I actually just started reading, and it's called Die Chinesen, and it kind of analyzes I think the mentality of Chinese people, and I think that is I like it, but I just started it, so I cannot say too much.
Actually, this book even has been recommended by another person. Really great, really great coincidence. I also read it. It's a great book. Yeah, it's a great book. Yeah, really good about China and Chinese people.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I think of another book.
Yeah.
Sorry. I think of another also essay, I guess, because that helped me actually to also understand the dynamics and the whole experimentalist nature of China. And it's these are the essays, or some essays by Sebastian Heilmann. I think one is called From Point to Surface. So there he really explains how the whole experimentalist approach comes into being, and that is it really explains the whole achievements China made. So that's what I also find interesting. Yeah, that helped me a lot for my PhD thesis. Yeah.
Great. I think that was a really great interview. Thank you so much, Madeleine. Thank you so much. Happy to meet you again. Bye bye. 再见.
Goodbye. Bye bye. 再见.